I'm going to take us on a little bit of a journey today from philanthropy in the past to philanthropy today. And so bear with me as we travel a little bit of a journey from the past to the present and what I think is going to happen in the future. So people have always followed their passions and been led by a strong moral compass in philanthropy. To know ourselves and understand our society, we have to know the backstory, which is to say, our history. As Aristotle so eloquently put it, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. It turns out philanthropy, or the love of humanity, which is the real definition, was alive and well with our First Nations people. Their love of country, family, and the spirit of their ancestors meant that they effortlessly cared for this land and each other for tens of thousands of years before the arrival of non-Indigenous people. And I'd like to pay my respects to the Indigenous owners of the land in which we meet today and to their elders past and present. Much of philanthropy since then, which began in 1813 in Victoria, was driven by volunteering and people, particularly women, who worked on the ground, getting their hands dirty, and then galvanising their substantial networks to contribute financially. Our earliest philanthropists were also activists who used their influence extensively across the community. The Benevolent Society in Sydney, the founder Edward Hall, with 5 other men, also founded one of the first newspapers and banks in New South Wales. Edward used these institutions as key mechanisms for communicating what was happening for others less fortunate in the colony. There were some distinguishing features of these early philanthropic and social pioneers that I would like to offer up for our consideration today. The idea of service, not drawing attention to the individuals so much as to the work. They often worked in small groups. They sought to solve intractable problems by giving people opportunities and pathways out of disadvantage. This sounds like the mission statements of a lot of foundations and enterprises today. They were not afraid of change and always looked for ways to improve their services. And they used their influence as much as their money. They threw their weight around. Our philanthropic forebears were connected influencers and advocates. Their success is indicated by the extent to which governments, the primary vehicle for collective action, took up the challenge of scaling the efforts of these philanthropists. In this way, education became universal. In 1909, the brand new Commonwealth government introduced the age and invalid pensions, picking up a role previously filled by churches and non-government organisations. Payments to the unemployed followed after the Great Depression of the 1930s. Post-World War II, the idea of a social wage took root, resulting in Medicare, prior to which those with means had provided for themselves and the poor were dependent on charity. Government became a key destination for individuals wanting to drive social reform in Australia from the Whitlam era onwards. On reflection, the rise of government service provision has contributed to our becoming somewhat complacent, believing as taxpayers that government was doing the work on our behalf. Over the same period, many of our philanthropic institutions were handed to the next generation of trustees, not all of them related to the original founders and family members. The weight of responsibility of the founders was felt, and these trustees in the main tried to stay true to the original founders' wishes. In the process, some would say they became risk-averse and lacked innovation. There are a few wonderful exceptions, the Reichstein Family Foundation in Melbourne, to name just one. So where are we today? I could load you up with mountains of data on our philanthropic sector, and I will leave you to Google, use Dr. Google for that later. But in a nutshell, everyday Australians give generously and often. The wealthiest Australians, the least. Corporate philanthropy has played a more significant role in Australia in the past 15 years through mining companies, banks and corporate foundations like the Macquarie Group, where partners' donations are matched. And I believe there's a great deal more to come as corporations move beyond CSR and employee-related programs to solving social problems which might also be good for business. This is best described by those great Harvard professors, Kramer and Porter, as shared value. On our side in Australia, we have the highest per capita income in the world. We have the highest health outcomes in the world. Our young people have the highest engagement in volunteering and giving back in the world. Last year, we were given the accolade, just to top it all off, as the happiest country in the world. And Melbourne, once again, I'm sorry, won the most livable city in the world. Simultaneously buoyed by our national good fortune, new philanthropic investment models around the world, and in the face of government's increasing withdrawal of funding and services, philanthropy in Australia is presented with an opportunity to revisit its inextricable link to revolutionary social change once again. There are 5 key and global trends which tell us that the world of social change and philanthropy is going through another period of great reform. The first is the purpose of the work. In the past, we were doing 2 and 4. It was about charity and welfare. And some of the first iterations of this were in our great institutions, the Smith family, the Benevolent Society. We moved in the last couple of decades to doing with, to co-designing programs with beneficiaries, with recipients. And agencies have cropped up in the last decade, like the Centre for Social Innovation, the 1020 Foundation. And then we also started to do work through enterprise. What would it look like if we employed beneficiaries or end users in actual work? And that was their way out of poverty and disadvantage. And an entire new sector of social enterprise has been established in Australia, led by people like Street in Melbourne, Your Co-op at Nunda, the School for Social Enterprise, and many others. The second area is the way the work is organised. We've moved from silos to place-based. And by that I mean work that works in communities where you think about the community as a whole, not one group, not one part, not one issue. And the idea of place-based has been led by some great organisations like United Way, the Australian Communities Foundation. The Maya Foundation led a full onslaught on issues and domains. So instead of just funding programs, they started funding domains of work. And they were the people who've set up big institutions now like AsiaLink and Asia Business, large institutions who are working in domain areas. Thirdly, the way the work is financed has changed radically. We now have not just grant funding from philanthropic investors or from governments. We now have social investment. Social impact bonds have arrived in Australia, and we have 2 being tested at the moment. We have the entry of impact investing, a whole lot of investors who want to see returns for the funds that they put in at a lower rate for a social return as well. We've got great organisations, one of them here, TFN, chaired by Alan English, one of your great Queenslanders, who I cannot believe has not been named Queenslander of the Year yet. We've got things like B Corp, we've got Good Pitch, we've got all kinds of new funding instruments, which is very exciting. Social Ventures Australia, Mission Australia, the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, Benevolent Society engineered the largest social enterprise in the world by taking Good Start. Remember Good Start? Remember ABCN Learning? Out of administration, turning it into a social enterprise, and thereby engineering the largest new financial model in Australia. 4 non-profits just getting together and doing things differently. Crowdfunding has taken off. Who has been involved in crowdfunding? Okay, crowdfunding started again, actually an early precursor in Queensland. A great Queenslander called Sean Gordon, who set up School Aid, where children were offered the opportunity to contribute funds, crowdsource their funds, and then decide where their funds would go to help other children in crisis around the world. Crowdfunding is now such a large-scale movement, it threatens to take over other forms of funding. It is the most democratised version of funding that you can get. You pool your funds and you decide where you're going to put them. And finally, or fourthly, the way the work is measured. We have now moved from short-term to long-term solutions. Organisations like Children's Ground, that I'm a patron of, that works at the moment in Jabiru and Kakadu National Park, has a 25-year generational change plan. Now that is going for it. That is putting where your heart and your money and your work on the line to say that you're going to invest and live and be part of a community for 25 years, which is generational change. We've begun to move from outputs to outcomes. We're using evidence-based approaches, much more so in child protection, homelessness and mental health. By the way, some individuals and organisations are still offended when asked for evidence. However, evidence is key. Evidence tells us who, what, how and where to invest for the best return over time. For example, the third billion women entrepreneurs are the next key global social investment. They own a third of all businesses in the world. And our research says that they reinvest 90% of their income into their family and their community. Providing young girls and young women with leadership and tech skills is one of the major tools that we can use to spark global change around the world. And finally, the fifth trend, the way we communicate. The wider community is in transition from tin rattling and passive giving to marrying this with campaigning and advocacy through organisations such as GetUp, Change.org, the reinstatement of the Climate Council, the Australian Resource Centre for Asylum Seekers crowdfunds its advocacy work. So the way we communicate and are bringing people on this journey of philanthropy has changed dramatically. It's individual, it's heartfelt, you get involved and you back something. Many of us here are involved in one of these 5 areas. We are all simultaneously entrepreneurs, collaborators, co-investors, and recipients of philanthropically led change. Globally, there's a compelling and inspiring picture of the past few years of philanthropy with the Giving Pledge led by Bill Gates, the G8 Impact Investing Group, and in my view, some of the most important data ever released by Oxford University academics called Our World Data, which shows us we are genuinely making progress on key issues such as health, such as poverty, such as democracy, despite what you read or see in the news or in the newspapers. The Foundation for Young Australians, of which I'm the CEO, brought the Nexus Global Youth Summit to Australia 2 years ago because we could see the opportunity of a movement that brings together early and often the next generation of young philanthropists, wealth holders, and social entrepreneurs. Nexus enables robust conversations about the why and how of social change, the stress testing of ideas, and the creation of collaborations between peers from different disciplines and perspectives. So finally, to young people. All over the world, young people are vitally interested in ideas, causes, and issues. They are rejecting traditional institutions and organisations in droves, and never so starkly as the 400,000 young Australians who did not turn up to vote in Australia's last federal election. And yet this is not the real story. The real story is tremendously inspiring young people like the 80,000 young people, by the way, which is double the size of any political party in this country. The 80,000 young people who are part of the Oak Tree Foundation trying to bring an end to poverty in their lifetime. The people of the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, Kids in Philanthropy that started teaching kids in school about philanthropy and fundraising, School Aid that I mentioned earlier, YGAP, the next generation of Costellos, Peter and Peter's nephew and Tim's son Elliot, who set up an entire new organisation for his generation of Gen Ys to set up restaurants, cafes, and use those funds to fund programs where they support young entrepreneurs in countries all around the world to step up and create their own futures. Young people are leading and getting behind movements for change. We have cause, and we need to be ambitious for our young people and to back them to create the change. I heard two wonderful statistics the other day. The next 50 years will see more change than the entire history of the world to date. And the intellectual capacity of our children has grown 8-fold since we were their ages. So they have capacity. Smart, rigorous, challenging and robust conversations which push us to think beyond the possible and the energy to drive change are the gift young people bring us. We're fortunate to stand on the shoulders of some philanthropic giants in this country. Their core ideals of service, collaboration, solving intractable problems, giving people opportunities, not being afraid of change, using their influence have stood the test of time. The role and independence of philanthropy is more than ever before that moral compass, which now today would be some amazing crowd-funded app. But it should guide our actions. And it's of great interest to me that one of the largest movements in the world at the moment is the empathy movement, because it seems to me a prerequisite for creating change is to bring our true, authentic self to this work. In the end, the process of great philanthropy is actually simple. It's to learn, connect, collaborate, act, repeat. But for these reasons, the legacy of our forebears, the 5 key trends, the traction which is being achieved by big social issues globally, and the energy and passion of our young people does mean that right here, right now, is the most exciting time for philanthropy to once again be the great innovators and change makers. What Mike and the group at QCF set up nearly 20 years ago is at the forefront of that new wave. In the next few years, when that fund gets to almost $1 billion, it will be the largest of its kind in the country. The opportunity to be courageous, brave and ambitious leaders of social change in your backyard, in your country and beyond is here for the taking. Thank you.